A few years ago, Matt Dillahunty made the claim that he could write a book better than the Bible. He said, in fact, I could just take the Bible and word for word copy it all, except reverse its position on slavery, and you would have a superior book. And then Sam Harris has, even said the same comment himself. And I don't know who gets the original credit for that, but is that true? Would removing slavery and the ability to have slaves in the Old Testament, would that really make the Bible better? Well, everyone that is keeping track of this knows that the Bible is actually instrumental for helping to destroy slavery, and still is. It is still emancipating people and setting people free. So why then would the Old Testament allow for slavery? And can we ever see that as moral? Well, I'm going to tell you, and somebody's just they're going to take my defense of this and say I'm pro-slavery. I am not pro-slavery. I am not pro, in our modern time, making slaves, keeping slaves, buying slaves, selling slaves. And so anything said along those lines is just a mischaracterization of what I believe. Especially, that's Old Testament, and it's civil authority for the Old Testament. It doesn't apply to modern times. So, but what is the right understanding here for why the Bible would have allowed slavery? Well, I want you to think about this. What is it that keeps our borders secure and our people civilized? And I'll tell you this, it is technology at this point that has advanced the ability to keep us civilized and our borders secure. Now, you're probably like, how does that really happen? Well, it's through superior weapons. And some of you are like, what? Like, where is he going with this? So superior weapons and communication. When you chart and read through history, anytime that gunpowder was introduced to a military's capacity, they began to heavily outperform anybody they were up against. And so anybody that wanted to retain any form of government or an army or a military or a civilization had to adopt gunpowder. Communication is also so powerful that you have to have communication lines to inform your troops and inform your powers about decisions that have to be made. And so those two things have greatly shored up our borders. I'm sure some of you at this point are like, I think you're stretching this. Hang on. Let's consider the ancient times before we had that advancement. How did a king or ruler establish his power and control? It was through brutality, through fear, through amassing power, through gaining more and more soldiers, through sheer size, through viciousness, and they ruled by fear. Anybody that has read Behind Alexander the Great, they would come in, these huge hordes of men, and they're basically like, hey, convert and join us or die. You've also heard about the huge armies of Xerxes, same process, gaining more and more people. Bow to us, join us. You've heard, and then all throughout the scripture, you have the same thing. You have these massive, massive armies that were how one amassed and controlled power and territory. Because big army beats small army. But there's a complication there. A large, massive army consumes a lot of resources. And yes, you can pillage your way forward. You can gather treasures. You can gather manpower. You can gather food and move forward. But you are plundering and leaving behind desolation often behind you. And you don't want to go back the way you came because there's no food there. You just burnt all the crops in the last place because you wanted to establish your dominance. You just burnt all the towns and places to sleep and killed a lot of the farmers behind you. So how in the world, why would you go back? And so there is this forward progression, and then these armies that are using all of these resources and everything are full of men that eventually want to go home to their wives and to their children as conquerors and to establish their dominance. But they couldn't just stay out in the field and out on the borders asserting that dominance. There was no good way to support that in the ancient world. Now, think about this. Let's say you're a micro ruler, a small king in an area, a gangster of some sort, and you've got, a band of 200 or 300 people, and you're ruling your area, and all of a sudden a wave of 500,000 men or 200 million men, whatever, not 200 million men, but this wave, this massive army is coming your direction. Well, you just pick up, pack up, move on, get out of the path, wait till they pass through, and then reestablish yourself in the region. Wait till things cool down, and then you don't fight them head on, just outrun them and establish yourself after the fact. So you've got to understand the borders were very fluid and not readily secured, because how do you get that many men together to just go secure your borders all the time? You're just hoping that the threat of you was enough that people will just do what they're supposed to do and send in their gold in the meantime. And this is probably why you had large army after large army over centuries clashing with each other, and even millennia clashing with each other. So Israel was called out of Egypt. Israel was a small people group of about 1 million people at the start who were called out of Egypt into not quite a no man's land, but in a territory where there was a lot of small tribes and other people groups there. Not these enormous people groups, but smaller people groups. And as you come in, and I'm not going to say that these groups were all smaller than the Israelites, I don't think that at all. When they were coming in, when Israel's coming in, and I've addressed this in a different video. If you want to see my video on quote-unquote genocide by, Alex O'Connor is talking about the genocide of the Bible, and I was like, it's not genocide, it's actually judgment. That's a different video, look that up. But God would ordain and tell Israel, as you're coming into a town and coming into an area, to destroy the child sacrificing groups. Those were the nastiest, awful people in the area, and you definitely want to clear them out if you plan on living in the area. It's very akin to what happened in South America with the Aztecs. You should read up on what we know about the Aztecs currently. When you are just running around and capturing tribes just so you can have a massive 4-day human sacrifice event where I think, if my figures are correct on this, where they sacrificed over 100,000 people to whatever the Aztec god of the time was. Those are some nasty, awful people, and no wonder the explorers that got down there was like, oh, we just need to wipe these people out. They are wicked. Well, why would it be okay hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, but not back when Israel was seeing some evil child sacrificing groups around them? I understand why God said go in there and just wipe them out. But if you'll notice the conglomeration of evil, there are the lead bad guys, and then there are some not so bad guys that will actually step up when the main bad guys are knocked out. And you'll notice that God told Joshua, he's like, go in and you need to clear these places out. And they did not completely do that. And I'm sure that God already saw that they weren't going to completely do that. But then he would allow for slavery. Well, if a people group if killing people, a lot of atheists talk about killing these people is just bad and it's genocide alongside. Okay, well, let's kill off the really bad ones. But the not so bad, well, let's just rule over them with an iron fist. Because if you don't, then they are going to rise up to be the premier bad guys in the not too distant future. You see, there are people out there that are wicked who, if they can get the upper hand, will do so. This isn't the wicked people that have the upper hand. It's those that can get it that will take that position if they can. And let me give you some modern examples. So a couple of years ago, there was this TV show called Undercover Boss or Undercover CEO or something like that. And all of us, blue collar people, we think that is fantastic. That's quite the show, because we know how CEOs and presidents of companies get out of touch with how things actually are. That's one of the things that's so interesting about these shows, is the people up top will make these ridiculous rules about how to run the company that you can't apply down low. That this is very well known. It's so well known, we make a TV series about it. So there's this pie in the sky, out of touch understanding about how people actually are. And this is where a lot of your philosophers, psychologists, and academics live in bubbles, and they don't really understand human beings because they are living in books and theories and in the minds of other people that were in books and theories their entire lives and are writing books and creating theories. And it's a very myopic bubble that doesn't have a real good understanding of humanity. And so atheists can pick up some of this and begin to think, oh, well, Israel shouldn't have had to kill anybody. They shouldn't have had to have a slave and enforce themselves over anybody. I mean, we've got this pie in the sky ideals about the way things can run, and it doesn't have to be like that. Let me give you a few illustrations to show you that things really haven't changed except for the technology to keep people in line. One of those is a friend of mine used to work in a loony bin, an asylum. And it used to be that one or two interns could manage an unruly, crazy person, because you were allowed to lock them in a padded room, or you could put them in a straitjacket, or you could tie them to their bed so they wouldn't hurt people. But those that are out of touch and above and beyond and high up the ranks are like, oh man, that person got hurt, so we might get a lawsuit. So let's cut the straitjackets out. And a person might get hurt, so let's not do handcuffs anymore. And that person actually was choked unconscious, and maybe they would have died. So let's not do that. And so by the time all these mandates are passed down on how you can't do certain wrist locks or certain bar holding, jujitsu moves on these crazy patients, it now takes like 7 people to get a handle on an insane person. And instead of the insane person getting hurt, it's the interns that get hurt. Very interesting. So you can see that out of touchness there, because the insane person, which I would just kind of equate with a wicked person, although they're not the same, but I'm saying it's going to take force to restrain force. Also, something maybe you're not aware of, and maybe I can help inform you, is that the police and security guards do not and cannot deal with criminals by textbook methodology. It doesn't work. There is a reason when they're putting people in the back of the car that at times they hit their head on the car door or on the roof of the car on the way into the back seat, is because they are unmanageable. They're not able to be managed, and all these strictures and restrictions are placed upon the police where they are not they are no longer in control. It's actually the criminals that are in control because we don't understand force on force because we're over here in books all the time and we only deal with ideology. This is a reason that prisoners in prison have accidents, that they accidentally fall downstairs with shackles on because they're unruly and unmanageable and they never listen. And so, they tripped because you can't deal with the wicked without force. I'll give you one more example. There's a mountain of a man that used to work out in the gym that I was at. And I'm not a small guy, so currently I'm about 245 pounds, and I'm familiar with heavy lifting, and I feel tiny beside this guy. He is 6'6", about 350 pounds, and he trains professional football players. He is a monster of a man, powerful of a man. And so one day we got in a conversation. I said, well, how did you get into personal training? He's like, well, I had to leave the public school system. It's like, you had to leave the public school? What'd you do there? He's like, I taught kids. And there's no way to control them. There's no way to handle them. And so I had to get out of there. So my point for sharing this with you is that people are still wicked. This is the natural course of human behavior, and it's always been this way. And as we look back in time, we understand that you had to have some force on force to control things. Let me go one step further. What is the natural relationship on a playground? Who ends up in control? The bullies. Bullies end up in control because they're the ones walking around and they scare a few people, and so those people begin to mob together. Sorry, I got hair tickling me. They mob together, and all of a sudden this bully he's okay now. He's pushing people because, I got people behind me, and now he doesn't mind slapping somebody because he's got 2 or 3 people that'll say he never slapped anybody. And they begin to rule by fear and dominance unless somebody more powerful, like a resource officer, can come along and straighten them out. So this is the way it was in the ancient world. This rule of law by power and brutality and size was actually in effect. And how did you keep your borders secure? Well, if you had neighbors that were too close that were utterly wicked, you go wipe them out. Or maybe you enslave them and actually put them to good use. You see, it's funny, this idea isn't even that old in America. It used to be that we had prisoners that would go work some of their debt to society off. I have seen... we know about prisoners smashing rocks, making license plates, collecting trash, doing some jobs for the community that should be done. And this would have been very not so different for the time of Israel. If the people beside you that were left would become bullies or wicked people, then why not enslave them and do so with the heavy hand to keep them in line and in order? Isn't that more humane and civil than destroying them also? I would say it is. So is Matt Dillahunty capable of writing a book better than the Bible? I don't think so, because you have a piece of truth and a God who has insight, who can write a book that is actually applicable to every single time frame that it will ever be in. Make no mistake, God is much wiser than a cocky atheist.